Board, Part 2. In response to popular demand for more discussion, we are offering this follow-up to our February forum about the history of the Park Board and how it manages our beloved park system. Wilmette City Club is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization founded in 1915 to educate, engage, and empower individuals to participate in civic life in Greater Cincinnati. We support good government and regularly present informative and free programs on civic issues. We invite you to become a member and get involved. The Trust for Public Lands 2022 Park Score Index just rated Cincinnati as number 4 in the country for parks. We can be very proud of that, but we still need to remain vigilant about how our park system is managed. At our last forum, David Stradling, the Zane L. Miller Professor of Urban History at UC, explained how fierce opposition to a series of development proposals for Burnet Woods led to the formation in 2018 of a nonprofit organization, Preserve Burnet Woods, which recently commissioned a report entitled Cincinnati's Park Board, A History, funded by the Stephen H. Weiler Foundation. This report is available on the website of Preserve Burnet Woods, if you'd like to download it. Alyssa McClanahan, historian, historic preservation consultant, and author of the report, gave a marvelous summary discussing the structure, appointments, and diversity of membership of the Park Board. We then heard insightful remarks from 2 respondents with extensive experience with our park system, Steve Schuckman, former longtime superintendent and manager of the Division of Planning Design for the Park Board, and Frank Russell, director of the UC Community Design Center and the Niehoff Urban Studio, and former Park Board member from 1995 to 2006. Tonight, we welcome back our 4 speakers and invite you, the audience, to participate in polling and more discussion. The poll questions are divided into 5 aspects of the Park Board: structure, accountability, diversity, qualifications, and appointments. For each of these aspects, one of our speakers will provide a refresher to set up the poll. Then you'll have the opportunity to vote and we'll display the results. After which there will be an opportunity for some further discussion. I want to thank Jeff Dye, our VP for programs, and our incoming president for setting up the poll. And we will now begin with Steve Schuckman, who will discuss the structure of the Park Board.
Thank you, Beth. So the Board of Park Commissioners is an independent board, as many of you must know. It was established by the city charter in 1907. It's a 5-member board appointed by the mayor to 6-year terms with confirmation by city council. The board is charged with management of the city's parks and parkways. The employees of the park board are city employees, but unlike all other city employees, the appointments of the employees are made by the commissioners rather than the city manager. Most cities have park and recreation agencies that function as city departments. And the park board does function as a city department, but again, it's not under the control of the city manager, it's under the Board of Park Commissioners. The independence was originally proposed to try to keep the board and try to keep the park system away from politics. And that hence its independence. One measure of independence that I think has worked very well over the years is that city council or the manager, the mayor can't decide to sell parkland, to use parkland for another purpose unless the park board has first approved it. The current structure has served the park, I think has served the park system very well for over a century. And as Beth mentioned, and you might have read, the city has rated in the top 10 of the 100 biggest cities in America for park systems under the Trust for Public Lands survey. And this year came out at number 4. And I think that's the highest rating that I remember. Though the board is independent and it's supposed to lift it out of politics, we do keep in mind, though, that the appointments are made by the mayor, and of course, the mayor is a politician. And I think those are some of the things we'll be discussing a little later this evening. I think that covers the basics, and we're just going to have a couple of questions about the structure, the independence of the board, and we'll see how people vote on those 2 questions in just a moment here. Then we'll move on to the other topics that Beth mentioned, and there'll be more opportunity for discussion to talk about the appointment process, the accountability of the board, diversity, and so on. So I think, go ahead.
Okay. Well, there's one aspect which I think you might like to talk about, and that is that if the park board were not independent, if it were a city department, would that make its budget more vulnerable?
Well, 2 things. I should mention that it functions as the city department, which means that most of its money comes from, though there's a healthy fundraising arm, the Cincinnati Parks Foundation, and the park system has always gone after grants. And there is private funding, and there's been a good history of private funding, and in fact, private donations of property that helped create the park system we know today. Most of the budget still comes from the city. And when the board spends that money, enters into contracts, they follow city procedures, they have to follow city rules and regulations and go through city procurement. So if it was a city department, one of the things that would be lost, that I think would be lost, is, again, when there's a public purpose for, say, a new school, for housing development. If the board wasn't independent, the park system would be a department, and again, could be vulnerable to changes in park use. It would be up to the city administration, the city council, to sell parkland or convert it to a different use. The budget could be affected in that the reason that the people have given to the park commissioners private dollars prior to the creation of the foundation, and then the foundation, which was created in, I think, 1994, is that money is not available to be used for another purpose. If the donor wants to give it to a particular purpose in parks or for parks in general, those monies would not flow as readily if it was part of the city coffers and it went directly to the city budget. So I think that's probably what you're referring to.
Okay, thanks. All right, we're going to try this. I'm not sure it's going to work. But here is our first group of questions addressing structure. So please take this opportunity to vote.
And while this is happening, just to mention what's pretty obvious, that this is a small group of people who are on the relatively small group of people on this call and who are interested. And this doesn't have a statistical relevance. We just wanted to get a sense of our audience tonight and some of these follow-ups to that first forum and to some of the recommendations and suggestions posed in the Preserve Burnett Woods report.
Oh, okay. So someone in the chat said, where is the poll? So.
Did you launch the poll?
Okay, I'm going to relaunch it. Okay, I have to say this is the first time that we've used this in a Zoom meeting, and so forgive me if it doesn't go.
Okay. It says there it is.
I'm not going to vote, but I see it on my screen.
Good. And there might be some who don't see it. We ran into somebody who maybe had an earlier version of Zoom, or there was some other technical reason. So if you're not seeing it, we apologize. we're doing the best we can with the technology.
Should be pretty quick with 2 questions.
Steve,
If I may ask a question about, can I ask a question or should I wait until the end?
I think you could ask a question, especially if it would inform your vote.
I guess my question is, if we decided to make changes on term limits or independence, would that go through the park board's own rules, or would that be something the city would have to do? That may be something that's more detailed, but I mean, are these things, are these changes doable?
I suspect that that is that would go back to the city charter and would have to go to the voters. I think it's in the charter, the establishment of the board, what the terms are. And originally there were 3 members, and somewhere around 1990, I think there was a charter amendment to expand it to 5 members.
Steve, do you think everybody is aware that there are currently no term limits and a term is 6 years?
Yeah,
I don't know if you said that.
I mentioned
Okay.
there's 6-year terms, and there are no term limits. And in the history of parks, there have been some commissioners that served for over 20 years. Cornelius Houck was one, some familiar names to people who know parks, and Erwin Krohn was another. And Marion Lindbergh, who was a commissioner for many years, was the president of the Board of Park Commissioners when I worked there, was on the board for over 20 years.
Okay, has everyone voted who wants to vote or can see the poll? It looks like 20 people have voted out of the 30, so.
And the tally?
Probably,
Well, and the results are?
And the results are, should the board remain independent, 75% yes, 5% no, and 20% not sure. Should there be term limits? That seems to be overwhelmingly yes. 90% in favor and 10% not sure.
I saw someone ask if the commissioners get paid, and no, they do not get paid.
Are there any other questions that people would like to raise about the aspect of structure?
I guess I will ask one more question. I'm concerned that I don't necessarily think of that we need, I think we need more commissioners concerned with natural history and conservation. So I voted in favor of term limits, but really it has more, my problem has more to do with the direction of the current board and some dissatisfaction with the current board. So that's why I voted for term limits. If it was somebody I approved of, I wouldn't necessarily want term limits.
Well, we are going to address the question of qualifications a little later on, so be sure to chime in then. The next aspect that we're going to discuss is accountability, and David Stradling will give you some background on that.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. It's nice to see so many of you again. We were thinking about accountability in a couple of different ways. One is whether or not you feel like you have, as a citizen, the opportunity to express your opinion to the park board, if there are enough opportunities for public engagement in the way that we describe it, enough opportunities for the park board to hear your comments on ongoing issues. And the other is how you think about the responsiveness of the Park Board of Commissioners to the public's input. So this would be the accountability, truly the accountability aspect of it, whether or not you feel like the Park Board of Commissioners as individuals or as a group feel compelled to respond to overwhelming public sentiment, or at least to the sentiment that reaches their door. So you see how these two things are entangled. If the Park Board operates in a way that has them mostly engaged with park staff and not engaged with the public or with elected officials, then they may or may not be hearing the full diversity of opinions about a particular issue, and in fact may be only hearing the most vocal participants in any particular issue. I think that's almost always the case with a democracy, that the people who are most concerned about an issue are the most likely to speak out. I'll note that there are a couple of ways in which the Park Board can hear from the public. One is that they hold monthly public meetings that anybody can attend. You don't have to be a citizen of the city. And it's obviously everything has been much more difficult under COVID, but if you're there ahead of time as the meeting gets started, you can ask to make a comment, whether it's on an issue that's on the agenda of the day or it's on another issue. The other major way that the Park Board can hear comments from engaged citizens is through a system of park advisory councils. Many of the largest parks have active PACs, as they're called. Burnett Woods has a PAC that regularly meets, and all of the PACs get together and meet on a quarterly basis. Note that again, with COVID, all of this has been much more difficult than it was in the past. During those quarterly meetings of the park advisory councils, the Park Board members may attend, but I've found that mostly it's park staff members, the professionals who actually operate the parks, who attend those meetings. As for the other aspect of accountability, I think has to do with elections. We tend to think of elections as a way of, in essence, regularly recalling those we don't think are doing a very good job for which they've been elected. And of course, that is not an option with Park Board members. They're not elected. They cannot be recalled. The only way that a Park Board member can be removed once appointed and approved by City Council is if the mayor finds them incompetent or having engaged in official misconduct, in essence, removing them with the support of City Council. I don't know, Steve, I don't know if you know of any of this ever happening, but I think it would be an awfully rare instance.
Yeah, no, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah, probably involving breaking the law. So that's really just my general sense of how to think about opportunities for engagement with Park Board. Obviously, individual members of the Park Board do meet with citizens. It's entirely up to them. There's nothing structural to it other than the Park Board meetings, which are scheduled and required. I do know that Park Board members as individuals attend neighborhood council meetings. They will meet with concerned citizens if asked, many of them. But again, that's not a structural requirement. It's simply Park Board members doing their job.
Where does it show you?
Right here.
Can't you get that off?
No.
Hey, Jim, maybe I don't know if you want. Yep, thanks, Jim.
Okay.
Why and what is the benefit of having monthly Park Board meetings open to other than citizens, residents of the city of Cincinnati? I think all public meetings are open to anybody. I think they don't distinguish between who shows up. You don't have to declare your citizenship to a residency in the city of Cincinnati to make a comment.
I could add also just real quick that there's nothing magic about monthly meetings. They could meet as often, and they do have special meetings. I think there was a time that they met every 2 weeks at
Oh.
one point.
So Beth, if you want to show the
Yeah.
2 questions.
Well, before I do, there's a question in the chat. Are there any requirements under the charter for when the meeting documents and agenda are made publicly available prior to a board meeting? Current document releases are often less than 24 to 48 hours before a meeting, making it difficult to comment.
To mine, Steve may have different information. I've read the section in the charter about the park board, which is very brief. It doesn't lay out. It may be that the municipal code lays out more specifically what the park board has to do, but the charter says nothing about. It doesn't say anything about public meetings, even, let alone whether or not documents need to be shown.
It's my understanding that meeting dates and agendas need to go out at least 24 hours in advance. It's a public meeting notice.
That's
Okay.
a general rule for public meetings I think for government, maybe in Ohio, or certainly since.
Yeah. And often, and I think the park board does this too, planning commission does it, that they'll announce in advance when the next month's worth of meetings or several months worth of meetings are. And just for the public in general, the park board tends to meet the 3rd Thursday of the month, just like planning commission meets on Fridays.
Okay, are there any other questions before I put up the poll? Okay. Here are the questions.
I see someone has asked, can somebody read these two? I'm not sure if somebody have eye problems. Somebody say, can you read these out loud for people?
Oh, sure. Question number 1, the park board enables sufficient public participation and comment. Yes, no, not sure. Question number 2 is the park board is sufficiently accountable to the public.
Kara asks a very good, while we're waiting, Kara asks a very good question, perhaps was already addressed. Is there an opportunity to create a Google survey to generate more interest from diverse audiences about their vision for the park board? We talked about this as a group, the 5 of us who were engaged in putting this on. I do think of this as merely a starting point for a conversation about the park board and how it operates, if there should be some reform, and if so, what form it should take. None of us are really kind of activists and have different responsibilities. So it doesn't seem like any of us will be doing that very hard work, but we do think that there will be opportunities to take both the report that the Preserve Burnet Woods wrote and also the results of these conversations to individual city council members and the mayor to see if there's interest in carrying this this conversation to the corners of the city that they would be able to reach. Does that answer your question, Kara?
Yeah, I believe so. I was more looking for, I guess I hopped into the meeting late, so I didn't get like the first 15 minutes of what the discussions were, and I haven't gone to the first meeting either. So I was just kind of trying to get a better understanding of what the goal, the overall goal is.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand you're not activists, right? But maybe I am.
We'll talk later.
Okay, but you're probably aware that the initial program in February featured a report that was commissioned by Preserve Burnett Woods. It's available on their website. It's a 70-page report. It does include some recommendations or alternatives at the end. And it's an excellent report, and I recommend that you take a look at it.
Yeah, if you all would share it in the chat link, maybe if somebody has easy access to it,
I can do
that would be great. I did not know that there was that report put out.
Yeah, so I apologize. This is we're happy that you're here, but we need to explain that this was sort of a follow-up to that earlier program, and we didn't intend to go over that material again tonight, but it is available in the report, and there's also a recording of the first session that you can watch because it was really excellent. Okay, I think 18 is all that's going to vote on this one.
Sorry, is that recording at the Cincinnati Women's Club, or is it at the Preserve
It's
Burnett Woods site?
Women's City Club website. You'll see it. There's a link to it on our homepage. Thanks for asking. Okay, on this question, the park board enables sufficient public participation and comment. 11%, there were only 18 responses. So, 11% voted yes, 61% no, and 28% not sure. The park board is sufficiently accountable to the public. 11% voted yes, 83% no, and 6% not sure. Okay, the next aspect that we're going to discuss is diversity of membership on the board. And again, David Starling will give you some background on this.
So I thought I would take up this issue and take it up directly after accountability, in part because I think they are very much related. As you're probably aware, the park board has typically been populated by wealthier Cincinnatians, folks who, and I'm talking historically. I'm not just talking about right now. They have overwhelmingly been white and male. This shouldn't surprise anybody. This is the way that governance in the United States has worked at all levels, whether it be public boards or city council itself. The first woman was appointed to the park board in 1957. At this point, we actually have a majority of women on the park board, which I'm not sure if that's the first time that's happened, but it's if it isn't, it's probably very rare. The first African American was appointed to Cincinnati Park Board in 1981, and I think generally since then there has been only one African American representative on the park board. As I said, I think that in a city that's very nearly 50% African American, we don't have firm data on income or wealth of the members of the park board. They tend to be people who are civically engaged, of course, but they also tend to be folks who are politically connected. Those two things often go hand in hand, which means that many of them are major donors to the mayor who has appointed them. They have, I know my neighborhood is well represented on the park board, usually is. Jim Getz is here as my neighbor. There are other neighborhoods that I think are well represented on the park board. East Side neighborhoods, as you might imagine, have been well represented in the past, whereas there are other neighborhoods that are not. There is not a residency requirement to sit on the board. I actually don't know where all of the current park board members live, other than Jim, who lives around the corner from me. So I don't know that that's taken into consideration by every mayor. But obviously the people who have been historically most engaged in city politics tend to live in the city. So I do think that there has been a very strong correlation between residents and membership on the park board. So we're going to ask, it may seem like we're asking the same question twice, but we're actually going to ask whether or not you think of the park board as being representative of the city's population, which is both an assessment of your thoughts about the park board makeup and also what the city looks like, but also a more pointed question about whether or not you think it should be more representative of city diversity.
I thought, let me just add, David, I thought you said earlier there was only one African-American board member, but there have certainly been several.
Oh, no, I mean at a time.
I'm not sure if that's the case.
David, if I could ask a question about the meaning of diversity. I'm thinking about diversity of interest and knowledge. I think that the question is more about diversity of male, female.
Yeah, here we're mostly
white.
thinking about demographics and personal background, not professional background. We'll
Okay.
get to the issue of qualifications. Obviously, they're very much related, but we'll get to the issue of qualifications later, which I think of as being more directly related to, professional background or training.
Okay, and did you see in the chat that Todd Christensen posted that Donald Spencer
He wasn't.
He wasn't?
No,
Okay,
that's not correct. Don was on the Historic Conservation Board. And Don was a early founder of Friends of Parks, but he wasn't a commissioner.
okay, there was Roscoe Foltz.
Yeah,
I
Roscoe
remember.
Foltz. There was Jenny Laster,
Yes.
Howard Bond.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in this group, question number 1, the park board is representative of the city's diversity.
This just goes on for 24 minutes. Here,
And we have 18 votes. And on question number 2, board members should be more representative of city diversity. Okay, we have 19 votes now. Anyone else want to vote?
I guess, Beth, you probably should read out the questions for each of these upcoming areas when you first put the poll up.
Okay, would you like me to repeat the questions? I'll do it one more time. Question number 1, the park board is representative of the city's diversity. Question number 2, board members should be more representative of city diversity. The typeface is kind of small, isn't it? Okay. The results are, is it representative of the city's diversity? 5% answered yes, 95% voted no. 20 people voted, by the way. Question number 2, board members should be more representative. Yes, 95%.
The second poll does not add up to 100%.
Oh, there's a 5% not sure.
Thank you. Okay.
I'd like to make a comment about that I know tonight we're talking about the park board, but many of these questions really pertain to all the boards or many of the boards and commissions of the city. I know the city has started to make a more concerted effort to have more diverse representation on its boards and commissions.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, next, the question you've all been waiting for, qualifications. Frank Russell is going to talk about that.
Hi, everybody. My name's Frank Russell. I'm an architect by training, so that is probably why I've been asked to put this group of questions out there for you. But I have also served as a park commissioner for 12 years, two appointments beginning in the mid 90s. So I've been off the board for quite a long time, served on the Recreation Commission, on the Cincinnati Zoo Board, and a number of others. And many of you here have also served on a number of city boards, if not civic boards and nonprofits. So what I'm going to ask you to do is try to define the perfect commissioner by describing what the qualifications would be. There will be a yes, no question here, and then a qualitative response where you can write whatever you want about what types of qualifications are necessary. Of course, it might be helpful for you to know a few things. One, think about the universe of the types of service boards that exist in the city and ones that you've participated with. I mean, there are many different boards. We have regulatory boards, for example, that are like the Historic Conservation Board. They have very specific requirements for members, an architect, a planner, so on and so forth. We have advisory boards that exist in the city that are made up of various members that may have different characteristics, but they're not necessarily defined. We have advocacy boards and philanthropic boards in the city that are made up of people that are activists and those that can support things that want to raise money. And we have oversight that maybe are composed by people that are seen more as trustees. The zoo board would be an example of that. So think about the universe of types of boards that exist and the kind of board that the park board is as you know it. It would be helpful if you knew a little bit about the park board. So I'm going to give you just a little bit here, and I'm going to ask Steve to join in the chat if you want to contribute any more detail. But the park board is no small organization. 5,000 acres, which comprises 10% of the city's surface. It's quite a big endeavor in the city. 50 plus parks and preserves throughout. And the board will be overseeing new parks and the management of parks. Other organizations exist within the park board, including Urban Forestry Board that manages the street trees. Lots of employees, 100 or so, probably more now. Budget when I was there, the budget, this was 15 years ago, was 10 million. It's got to be 20 or even 30 now. I don't even know. Connection with other organizations and units like the Parks Foundation, interface with the Cincinnati Recreation Commission, Cincinnati Park Board, management of lots of programs like Nature Ed, Nature Education, events that happen throughout the parks. So this is quite a huge endeavor. So think about what kinds of qualifications would be comprise what would make the perfect super commissioner. We talked a little bit about the residency qualifications. We've talked about demographic issues, wealth, things of that nature. That is not the focus of this question. You're welcome to contribute things to the qualitative response, but the focus is more about the, professional qualifications. There's another group of qualifications that you're welcome to comment on as well. Political capacity, the ability to raise money, the ability to communicate the mission of the park board and negotiate. Those are sort of qualitative aspects of the qualifications. We're focused, and you're welcome to comment on those in your responses. We're focused a little bit more on what are the harder qualifications. you'd think of professional qualifications. What's the training that you think is necessary for a parks commissioner to have? What vocational background should the parks commissioner have had to be well informed or to be functional in this role? Are there service qualifications that the commissioner should have had? Should that person have served in a capacity somewhere else that's relevant? Are there academic qualifications that would contribute to the commissioner's ability to participate at a high level and meet their duties? So this is sort of the universe of things to think about. Focus on those hard qualifications, but again, you're welcome to contribute in the chat or in the qualitative response on other aspects.
But I'd only add one thing, Frank, that under the charter, I believe, one member of the Board of Park Commissioners also serves on the Recreation Commission. So, but though most cities have combined Parks and Rec, in Cincinnati, they are separate entities, but there is that connection besides just working together as fellow agents or sister agencies.
Can I also note, Frank, that I don't think we need to think of one ideal park board member. I'm thinking that you might think of diversity of park board, and the example that we talked about last time is the Historic Conservation Board, which has a series of categorical requirements, so that there's always the one that I'm most interested in. There's always a professional historian who's on the conservation board. But so when the historian leaves, that person needs to be replaced by another historian. Somebody in the real estate field needs to be replaced by somebody in the real estate field. So not everybody is the ideal total contributor to thinking about historic conservation, but together they bring in a diversity of backgrounds.
The same is true of the Park Board's own Urban Forestry Board, that there are certain positions, someone in the green industry who's landscaper, actually the city engineer, I believe, is represented on the forestry board. So again, it's a certain sort of designated seats, if you will.
Okay, any other questions or comments before we vote? Let's put up the poll.
I don't see it yet.
Yeah, I know. Something has gone a little awry here.
While you're playing with that, I'll answer one of the chat questions. I believe the original park board was 3.
Yeah, it was
3 members, and that it was expanded to 5. And the charter will control its potential future expansion if that were part of the equation here. Interesting question.
Okay, I may have to clear the whole poll, but I've downloaded the results so far. So here goes.
And if you don't find enough space on the qualitative response, you can go ahead and put it in the chat.
Okay, so can everybody see this now?
Yeah.
Okay, so the question number 1 is board members should have specific qualifications. Single choice, yes, no, not sure. Question number 2 is what types of qualifications should board members have, and it's open-ended.
We're going to be, or Beth is going to be telling us what your qualitative responses are. So this will not be a scientific result, but we'll get a bit of a word cloud of what some of you are saying about the types of qualifications that you see. An interesting question in the chat. Are there advisors to the commissioners? I can speak to my experience, which was that we did have at various times advisors, trainers. We never had a mentor, but we did have people come in to advise us and train us about certain aspects. And we did have retreats in which we could get the benefit of that interaction, although it was topical, depending on what was important at the moment.
Yeah, I would sort of a different take on that question. I'm not sure if that's what they meant, that certainly the park board is supported by professional staff when it comes to forestry issues. We mentioned the Urban Forestry Board exists to advise the park board on its decision making. And they interact with many partners.
This apparently is taking some thought.
And historically, I mean, I can't believe there was a commissioner that didn't depend on the advice and guidance of the staff. The staff are have a lot of expertise in every category that they need to, and are very distinguished in what they do.
Okay, there's a comment in the chat from Jim Getz, the chair of the park board, who says the park board is also responsible for the investment management of 20 million in endowment funds. Should there be financial expertise on the board? A reasonable question.
And I think actually Jim would know this better than me. I think the all funds budget for parks is somewhere around 25 million now.
I may comment that I think that the financial knowledge is critical. I think the attempting to allocation of funds to various areas is a separate issue, but you have to have a balanced budget, certainly, but I would like to see more allocated to natural history areas, conservation, and restoration.
Of course, it's a slightly different question if you're talking about the allocation of funds and the budgets that the park board puts together every year, and that the city, for most of recent years, has asked for reduced budgets, and operating funds are always the ones that are in the shortest supply.
I will say the natural areas have never been significantly advocated for, and have been underfunded, tremendously underfunded for 25 years.
Yeah,
It's my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. I thought at the end of the session tonight, we might talk about, if there's time, other issues like that, but you know, that's not the focus right now.
Okay, we have some comments. The answers were cut off fairly shortly. Budget, long-term financial management are different. It's hard to get it all in with 200 characters. Okay. Agreed. Perhaps post the survey to allow more time for answers. What if the park board worked with financial people from the city? Too few spots on the board.
And I would add there that one of the very important park board leadership positions is the person who manages the budget, who in my experience has always been someone from a pretty high level of expertise.
Okay, the biggest need is to create a bullpen of grant writers to help the neighborhoods with grants for neighborhood parks. Okay, 20 people have voted. I'll end the poll. All right, question number 1, should park board members have specific qualifications? 70% said yes, 10% no, 20% not sure. What types of qualifications should board members have? I can see this. I don't know if you can, so I will read. Diverse qualifications, but I think all board members should live in the city and have shown an interest in parks in their volunteerism or in their vocation. Board members should include a botanist or horticulturalist, a professional educator, and a representative from an underserved neighborhood. The number of board members should be increased. Each member should be selected based on categorical requirements. 1 should have a professional background in public recreation, 1 in ecology, sustainability, conservation, 1 in business, etc. At least 2 of the members should have significant natural history knowledge and be willing to educate others on the board of the importance of this area and be willing to work to fund this. A naturalist background, degrees in environmental studies or sciences, inclusivity and diversity. Preferences for selection of woman, BPOC, executive director for nonprofit experience, city residency, natural sciences specialist, architect, engineer if you can't find an architect. Deep interest and use of Cincinnati parks. Each board member should have different qualifications that make a board with a strong knowledge base, historic structure maintenance, naturalist, financial, tax, it got cut off. Technical qualifications like historic conservation board members, green space experience, financial expertise, a background. There's also another comment, be able to return emails. A background which includes environmental fluency and the role that public parks play in public health, particularly in urban areas with high pollutive factors, an understanding of old growth forestry as limited and critical natural resource, certification in public engagement, as well as the expected educational level of an executive commensurate with custodianship of this level of public assets, both natural and financial. We can buy expertise and advisors. We cannot replace destroyed forests. They just need to be willing to hear the people who work on or live near parks because they know what really goes on or how the choices affect them. Need to listen to the staff of professionals. Previous local neighborhood community volunteer activist, possibly educational and career background with horticulture, natural history and science, zoological and green conservation. There seems to be a theme here about natural sciences, environment, public engagement, upholding the historical mission of the Cincinnati Parks and understanding its history, minimum qualifications such as previous board or management experience, obvious concern for preserving the parks, not a political contributor. And one last comment, I feel they should reside in the city and that there should be more transparency in what they are up to. Academically, they should have current awareness of importance of environmental impact in decision making. Okay, well, that was very revealing, very interesting. Okay, any more discussion about qualifications?
Very more widely ranging than I would have expected. I really appreciate the breadth of what I heard.
Okay,
I will say I certainly advocate for natural history areas and children's education, but I was surprised how many people share my view or share.
Here's a comment. It is very odd that board members do not have or use a park board email address. Has this changed?
I think correspondence with board members has always been through the department. So comments would go to the director's office, who would get them to board members. I believe that's how that's worked for some time. Maybe you recall, Frank?
We certainly didn't have, I don't think they had the internet back then. Tablets, I think. But, it is one of the things that is also a factor in considering who the right board members would be. The qualifications is the way things are communicated. As I remember, we were primarily exposed to the issues at the board meetings. We were expected to read the packet, understand what was going on, but the interaction was to occur at the meetings in public. I'm sure it operates in lots of different ways, but that was my expectation when I was serving.
Okay, two comments. Commissioners currently use personal email addresses, not city emails. And Jim Getz says, correct, board members are not city employees or on the city IT system. Another comment is that the required expertise on the part of the commissioners depends on if they are willing to hire an appropriately qualified director. If the director has these qualifications, they would have to listen to the director. So, I think that raises the question of what qualifications should park board commissioners have that complement the qualifications that the staff have.
I think the general approach over the years, and I can't speak to all the former mayoral appointments and council confirmations, was basically people who cared about parks and public green space, and often were people of some affluence and influence, and would be effective as commissioners, being the stewards of the park system and speaking for parks.
But they wouldn't necessarily duplicate the skills and expertise of the staff.
No.
Okay. Bob? You're muted.
As you know, the board is supposed to set general policies, and the park director and other park employees are supposed to execute these policies. So the general policy is supposed to be sent by the board. So it's certainly important to have a board with diversity. It's certainly important to have the director, especially of the parks, have a broad knowledge and a broad range of interest. So that's just generally the board, though, is setting general policy. For instance, for development in Burnett Woods, that would be set by the board, not by the park director.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think in my tenure, I had the experience of two directors, three, if you throw in Steve, who was an acting director briefly. Our last director, who many of you will remember very well, Willie Carden, had a lot of experience in facility management and some construction. He helped rebuild Fountain Square. And but knew nothing about green things that we knew. But this person turned into, in my opinion, an extraordinary leader, managed people very well, and led the park board to a much higher level, I think, than many could have. So it's an odd situation, what the expectations are for staff. But I can tell you that everybody that served under him had tremendous credentials. Gerald Checo, Steve Shuckman, everybody else was very, very well qualified, probably some of the best in their fields. So it's an interesting way of thinking about, the ecology of the relationship of the board to the senior leadership, and then the middle management of the organization. Not to mention the foundation that it currently is separated, but is integral to how the park board functions.
Okay, thank you. The next and final group of questions concerns the appointment process, and Alyssa McClanahan will give us some background on that.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So like Beth just said, we have one more round of questions. So these are related to the appointment process, but they're definitely connected to everything we've talked about thus far, growing from earlier questions about diversity and representation. So as Steve and others have already said, commissioners are currently appointed by the mayor with approval from city council. And that appointment process was set up with the park board when it was set up in the early 1900s. And that got codified into the city charter in the 1920s. And like David already explained, historically, the people that mayors appointed were for sure well-intentioned people that I think really cared about parks, but they were not terribly representative of Cincinnati. Like David said, they tended to be, for many years, older men, all white, quite affluent, politically connected. And so when I was working on the report, trying to better understand the park board's history throughout the 20th century, one of the questions I asked myself was why are they appointed? I know how they're appointed, but why are these particular people selected? And what I found was that early on in the early 1900s, and through the mid 20th century, a lot of the people that mayors appointed were just really well known in Cincinnati for parks preservation and natural conservation. And those are people, as Steve mentioned, like Cornelius Hawk, just people that lived and breathed parks and really cared about them. And the recommendation seemed like an obvious choice. And I found that a lot of those people, as they left the park board, tended to recommend a replacement, which from my research, the mayors generally accepted and took that recommendation. But I also found that historically, a lot of other recommendations came to the mayor from political circles that the mayors tended to travel in, from the business community, and that sometimes those were the recommendations that informed the mayor, maybe more than others. It was a bit frustrating to me when I was trying to do the research of exactly why are these men and women selected, because they're just recommendations, and sometimes news of the recommendation will make it into the newspaper for someone like me to track down, but none of it was necessarily offered up readily by any mayor. Some of them said some stuff, but it was very difficult to figure out why exactly a person was appointed. And this relates to this issue of transparency and accountability. There's no very clear mechanism where a mayor has to say exactly why he appointed someone. I think that also speaks to the qualifications issue you all just discussed. And as David discussed, when we get into the 1970s, 80s, 90s through today, the board definitely has gotten more representative of the city. I think a lot of that has been the result of mayors and city council becoming more representative of the city, and people that care about things like diversity tend to have that on their mind as they're doing appointments. But even as our park board, I think, has more people of color on it and more women over the past 3 to 4 decades, I think the point still remains that the structure to work well as it was intended relies on a good mayor that cares about appointing good people. And there are a lot of qualifiers in that could go awry, that might make some people question if that's a good structure. So we designed a couple of questions in this section. The first of which asks you if you think that this appointment process is problematic and needs to be changed. And then follow-up questions ask you to think about ways in which it could be changed, if that's something you agree with. So a couple of ideas we had were, do you think it would be a good idea for the mayor to appoint some of the commissioners, but not necessarily all of them? Or I think that kind of opens the door for other questions, one of which is, the possibility that voters could maybe select some of those commissioners. As David mentioned at the beginning of this, we don't elect them, there's no recall option. So kind of opening the door for a structure that would have citizens voting on these people. And then the last two questions ask you if it's a good idea to put a city official on the park commission, someone like the city manager, just as an example. And if it's a good idea to put a member of another citizen staffed commission, like the planning commission, for instance, or the recreation commission on the park board commission. And some of those ideas, suggestions came from other citizen staff boards that we have in our city, just for a little bit of background. So for instance, the planning commission that we have, 5 of its members are appointed by the mayor. 2 are a city council member chosen by the city and the city manager, or someone designated by the city manager. And another example would be the Recreation Commission, which is a 5-person citizen staffed board. 3 of those people are appointed by the mayor, 1 by the school board, and another by the park board, appointed by the park board and is a member of the park board. So some other kind of food for thought before Beth releases the questions.
Okay, any questions before we go to the poll?
I will say I find that much more complicated, and that's a difficult subject. I have to think about that significantly.
I think you make a good point. Here's the poll. So question number 1, would you support changing the appointment process? Yes, no, not sure. There must be a lot of people who are not sure because only one person has voted. Okay, that's better. 6.
Are you going to read them all out, Beth, or just the first
I'm going to
one?
wait because we have had 20 people voting. I'm going to wait until everybody's voted on these first 2 questions because you can't see all of them all at once.
You have to vote on all of them before you submit them.
Yes, so when I see that 20 people have voted on the first 2, we can scroll down and then vote on the others.
But you submit them all at once.
Yes. Okay, we're up to 18. Does anyone else want to vote on these first 2? 19, 20. Okay. Questions number 3 and 4. Number 3, would you support citizens having a voice in board appointments? Oh, I see what you're saying, David.
Yeah, you really have to, if you submit it, you won't be able to vote on the rest of them.
Okay, I thought that, so what I'm looking at isn't what you all are looking at. Okay. And then 5, let's see. All right. So we have 18 votes on the last 3 questions.
I don't think
19,
you read
one
the,
more.
you didn't read the last questions, did you?
Well, let me back up. Question number 3, would you support citizens having a voice in board appointments? 19 out of 21 people have responded. The 4th question, would you support an official from another citizen staffed commission serving on the board? And question number 5, would you support a city departmental or administrative representative serving on the board? We have 19 votes. And I'm getting one in the chat. Okay, so here are the results. Would you support changing the appointment process? We got 22 out of 22 votes, 73%. Yes, 5% no, 23% not sure. Question number 2, would you support the mayor appointing some but not all park commissioners? 65% yes, 10% no, and 25% not sure. 3, would you support citizens having a voice in board appointments? 65% yes, 25% no, 10% not sure. Question 4, would you support an official from another citizen staffed commission serving on the board? 60% yes, 5% no, 35% not sure. And the last question, would you support a city departmental or administrative representative serving on the board? 50% yes, 15% no, and 35% not sure. And regarding question number 4, Jim Getz says, there is already another member of another board on the park board. And who is that?
A member of the Recreation Commission is always on the park board.
Well, I think there's always a park board member on the rec commission.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the opposite.
The same principle. There are 2 people. There is someone on each of the boards from other appointed boards.
Okay,
Is that a requirement, Jim, or is that just the way it's happened recently?
That's per the charter.
And was that the charter? He said 1907. I didn't think that the Cincinnati City Charter came until the 20s, but do you know which charter that was?
Yeah, actually, I thought it was just that a member of the park board is also a member of the Recreation Commission.
Right,
Sorry.
which means that somebody on the park board is always, there is a member of another commission.
Right.
So it's the same thing.
okay. All right, so that's the end of the poll. Is there anything, are there any other questions that we didn't include in the poll that you think should be asked? Oh, yes, Bob.
I I feel it's not necessarily how the members are selected. It's making sure we have a good diversity. I think that, and how that is done, I don't know. I think from having observed the park board, they're very financially knowledgeable. I think they're doing a very careful job. I'm more concerned that they're on the broader issue of allocating resources to various projects. They need more input and need a wider diversity on those selections, not on their financial responsibility, which I think they're doing a very good job on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There are some more comments.
I see a number of comments about PACs or park advisory councils.
Yes.
Just real quick, there are at least 24, and there might be more advisory councils, and they function in different ways, but essentially they're just groups of citizens who care about a park or a collection of parks. And to be a member of that advisory council, you don't have to live in the neighborhood the park is in. You just have to care about that park. And some are more active than others. Some have more members than others. Some raise money. A lot of them put on just raise awareness, or they put on events and programs, or certainly they come to parks, to the park board to ask for improvements in their parks or to make suggestions and to work as volunteers. It's nothing that's in the charter. It's just something the park board established some time ago, so citizens could have more direct link, even beyond community councils, to parks and to the park board.
Okay, then there's
I have a couple
question.
comments about the advisory councils. I've been on other advisory councils where there's no authority for the advisory council. I would say, in general, the communication with the park staff has been pretty good with the Brentwood Woods Advisory Council, but not perfect when they do things that we don't know about. And one thought I had is that the advisory council minutes could become public record on the city's website. That's just an idea I had, as well as the letters to before the advocacy letters before the park board meetings also could become public record, so that the park board and the public will know more what is going on with each of these individuals and the advisory councils.
Thank you, Bob. There's a question in the chat from Cynthia Duvall. What level of importance should the Cincinnati Park Board give to community councils in considering park changes and challenges? Steve, are you able to answer that?
Well, I'm not sure I could answer level of importance, but certainly what community councils think about proposals that parks makes for parks in their neighborhood, or things that they want to do. The board listens just as the city council listens to comments from community councils. I mean, community councils are one recognized form of citizen participation that city government recognizes. I think that the board and council also recognize that not everyone in a neighborhood is necessarily represented by the community council. So it's just one, just like park advisory councils, it's just one way of formalizing responses to the board comments, suggestions, and routinely the board, when it's making changes in a park, major changes in a park, if there's a park advisory council, the park board will, or park staff will go to that advisory council and that community council to get input from the communities. And then ultimately it's up to the board as a decision-making body to decide what to do with those comments or with those projects.
Okay.
I would still like to see those the comments from the advisory councils be part of a permanent record as opposed to just a conversational record.
I believe that the comments are actually do become public record, and I thought that they were read into the minutes.
I don't think that, I don't think letters, maybe possibly the actual, not the minutes, but the actual voted on proposals probably do get on the public record. But what I was thinking, one thing I was thinking is that when you show up at the board meetings themselves, you have 2 or 3 minutes to speak. That isn't the public video record. But if you write a letter to the park board before the meeting, that does not become part of the public record. And I think they should be equal. So.
Well, they are all public records.
Mhm.
Well,
Also point out that in addition to the community councils that are typically consulted when, as Steve mentions, any major changes are being made, or in the case of, you know, the Centennial Plan, the whole system plan was being looked at. There were visioning sessions and engagement that took place outside of board meetings with consultants or staff that led these engagement opportunities. And then the board members could participate in this as they could, as they were available, or they were depending on staff or the consultants to bring back the feedback. So by no means is there a vacuum there in which the board is not getting any of the feedback. We're getting it, we're getting letters, we're getting emails that are packaged in what we see for the meetings. But I'll also say that there are advisory councils for each of the parks. And the Urban Forestry Advisory Council, for example, not to mention the foundation itself. So there are multiple layers and levels of opportunities for feedback. I'm not saying that it's a perfect system, but I'm saying that there's a lot of feedback mechanisms that exist and have been utilized. I'm not suggesting that it's perfect, but there's something there that that has existed, certainly during my tenure.
And I think you alluded to, Frank, certainly putting together the master plan for the whole system, but generally when there's new parks or where there's major changes in a park, the park boards routinely had open houses. It's had a number of public meetings. We have meetings in neighborhoods all over the city on different issues where public is invited to comment.
Certainly.
I will express my opinions, maybe possibly, maybe an email to you later. I think that I'm still not totally really satisfied with that, but I'll let it go till later.
Okay, there's an interesting comment here in the chat from Nora. She says, I think the power the park board yields should be addressed and minimized by changing the structure of the park executives. Rather than one director, 3 directors, each overseeing a different type of parks, neighborhood park, status parks, and entertainment parks, for example. This would also keep continuity if a director is dismissed rather than derailing the organization.
I can speak to that for a quick minute. What I found in my work with parks is that one of the problems is that we have so many, it's a wonderful thing, but it's also a problem from a management perspective, is that we have so many different types of parks where Burnout Woods operates more as an urban nature preserve-ish park. I don't even know the term. We have other parks that are entertainment parks and they make money for the system, where there's other parks that have a big amount of historical structures in them. So the needs of them are each different. So if there was a different director for each type of park, that would require a different skill set. And then also the directors could not get, quote unquote, ganged up on, for lack of a better term, by the board, because they would have more continuity. Thoughts?
I guess to me, that's what staff is for.
I think the problem is with the staff is it's just an unequal balance of power.
I have a comment also.
Ganging up
Um,
on the commissioners, really.
Yeah, hi, Kara speaking. I guess my issue with the entertainment parks, it should be mentioned that if we are talking about like Fountain Square or Washington Park, those are both owned and managed by 3CDC through a long-term lease.
Not
And
exactly.
so most of that income goes to them as they are staffing it. So there's actually not any real money in parks, or at least in the parks that are owned by the park system.
Well, I think it's
I think
important.
that's the way it's always been structured to be.
I think it's important to note that both Washington Park and Ziegler Park are owned by the Cincinnati Parks.
Yes, they are owned by them. Yes, but they are not managed by them.
Well, actually, that's not quite correct. There's a shared management of different aspects of Ziegler Park and Washington Park.
Okay.
And I would just
Okay.
mention that there are, there's not necessarily a clear delineation between what's a neighborhood park and what's a destination park and what's a neighborhood park that serves several neighborhoods. And many parks, and a lot of them coming from the communities themselves, put on concerts and put on different programs and functions to draw people to those parks. And some are more nature-oriented and more rustic, and some are more urban. But a lot of them share a lot of the same kinds of needs and services.
There was
I'm not discounting the need for green spaces in Cincinnati. I'm just want to mention that some of the parks that are more built up and have the potential to be a source of income for that's earmarked directly to the parks is not there, you know?
Well,
Or
actually,
I mean, that's mostly federal or state money that, you know, or city money that is coming in. But the amount of money that parks makes probably from, you know, the Crone events or the carousel, it's all very, it's drops in the bucket, you know, and or not the bucket, the lake.
well, but actually it's the park system's always tried to balance fee and free services. And as you mentioned, Crone does make money and makes a big portion of its budget. There are programs, there are rentals of shelters and lodges. There are events that happen, for instance, at Smale, and rentals of spaces there that brings money to parks. In fact, the rent from the Morning Lager House brings money to parks. So there is some revenue that comes to parks, but it is still very dependent on tax support and private support.
Hi, this is Cynthia Duval. Am I free to speak?
Go ahead.
First off, just in response to the last point, our park system was not designed to make money. It is not supposed to be a profitable enterprise. But I wanted to address Nora's point about the different types of parks, because I think one of the greatest assets of our park system is the fact that we have a very diverse park system that can meet the needs of different people. If you want a more entertainment focused park, we have those. If we want nature preserve style parks, we have those. But what we're seeing happen is our human drive to want amenity and luxury is trying to homogenize the park system, where we've got more pavement and turfing and structured surfaces coming into parks, which perhaps should be preserved as more natural spaces. And what is sincerely lacking in our current board's directive, and they've been asking for it for at least 4 years, is any sort of vision for the park system as a whole. There's absolutely no doubt that we are going to need a park levy soon to offset this painful maintenance deficit we have going on. and the current board does not have any vision or cohesive plan to begin to support advancing a tax levy through this city. It just won't happen until we can actually get a cohesive vision. Hopefully that vision embraces our natural spaces a little bit better and says some of these places are going to stay more wild nature preserve-ish, some can be more entertainment district, and some are the neighborhood playgrounds that we also find important for the people of the city that need access to green space. Thank you.
I think the board recognizes that the last master plan dates from 2007, and it's certainly overdue.
Yes, I think especially if you want buy-in for a levy, that whole process of doing the plan would help generate buy-in. So it's after 8:30.
Can I ask?
Yeah,
Sorry, just one really
we're going to
short-
wrap
short-
up pretty soon here.
Really short, just really short, that if you want people to buy into the levy, you have to be good neighbors. And so sometimes that when the little parks that have been left out all over all this maintaining of the big parks, which are great too, but the neighborhood parks tend to get excluded because they don't need all of the paving and the upgrading and the bathroom facilities and all that sort of things. So in some situations when trees fall or things and damage neighbors' property or are left neglected, the surrounding area is very unwilling to support the parks. That's an issue I found with people, that when they get treated badly, they don't feel like supporting it. So that's why I think it's important to listen to the people who live right near them. That's all. Now you can wrap up. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure you're right. I think the park board has a long list of capital projects that are overdue that they would like to do, and are dependent on grants and on funds from the Cincinnati Parks Foundation. In a way, neglect of parks is a case study for why you need a levy too, So anyway, I think we need to wrap up. I want to thank our four speakers for a marvelous job and a great discussion. I want to thank everyone for attending, including the chair of the park board and park board staff members. All registrants will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording of tonight's program and the results of the poll. And we will use the polling results to consider future action, which could include conveyance to city leadership. If you would like to have a copy of the Preserve Burnet Woods study, you can find it on their website. And I, for one, am very interested in hearing more from anybody who would like to continue this conversation. And you can reach me at wccpresident2020@gmail.com. So anyway, you will hear from me in the next week or so. So thank you so very much. Thanks for your devotion to Cincinnati's beautiful park system. And have a good night.
Thanks, Beth.